me. Okay. Great. Now, so let's start. Well, where do these notes come from? Well, they come from a lecture I gave. It was actually about applied games design, and then I saw some example projects in Unity and realized that as a game designer, when you approach Unity, some tricks of the trade may not be obvious, but I also realized that how these guys learning game design by programming in Unity, how lucky they were, because so many things that you read in game design books and in theory you will probably miss the heart of the matter if you're not testing and practicing the game design theory by developing prototypes, running prototypes, and not only prototypes, and going from prototype to production. And so much you can learn by simply by learning, let's say, not to be a super professional Unity, but by learning how it works, and so to be able to interact with a developer. Now, so I've been collecting notes about things that you can model in Unity as a game designer. And so I'm proposing them here. They're not perfectly coherent, but they may make sense overall. So, of course, the way I'm approaching this is with a specific focus on how to use Unity, and I'm starting from the classical definition of developer as somebody who has these three qualities, main three qualities, which are arrogance, impatience, and laziness. And this is, and in particular, laziness means brings with it a lot of consequences, not only negative ones, in fact. And so my ideal is to that you're not working for the tools are working for you. And the main objective is not let's say the shortest possible code, but the main objective is obtaining a code and a game that you can work with, that is easy to change, easy to read, easy to work with, also for people who are not the core developers. So, and I know that this is particularly in game development, there are many people that disagree with this and have a different approach, and actually that's too bad. But anyway, and so things that you will hear if you're a game designer and you start working with yes, laziness is a virtue. So if you will hear this many times, but I really suggest you not to be misled by this, that you should build your own game engine, which means you don't have contact with the reality of games today. Or I heard things like using Unity but not the editor, do everything in code, and one really wonders why are you using Unity at all? Because it's such a editor-oriented environment, and silly things like games should be programmed in C. And for somebody who's come from assembler like me, it's really sad to hear these things said today. And maybe the worst one is that performance is the first thing you should go after in games instead of being the last one. So anyway, if you want to follow any of these, what follows here is completely useless for you. So you should stop now. So, but instead, if you have the opposite aptitude, or you wanna adopt the opposite attitude, which consists of mainly quick prototyping and going to the core of the game, that is implementing its mechanics and its narrative if it has it, and be open to games which are technologically very simple, at least misleadingly simple looking. And so games are not mainly about technology. And another thing which I notice and I hear is this idea that game design is a profession by itself, and I mean, this is factually false, and there's a reason for that, and there hardly are any pure game designers if you discard people that are teaching game design. And I also find that game design school, there's these schools for game design, and they should, first thing, I think, if they were honest, they should tell their students as first that this game design by itself is not a profession, not because there are not no specific skills in game design, which I strongly believe, but it's like one of the dimensions that you have to have if you want to be a professional in games. And so what follows, of course, for somebody who is already using Unity, or starting to use Unity, or intends to use Unity and is gonna come back. So I make a lot of assumptions about basic familiarity with Unity, mono behavior, and writing scripts on game objects. Okay, so I'm focusing on Unity because I think that Unity, specifically Unity, is particularly friendly for environment for the game designer, because in the last 2-3 years, many features have come out in Unity that really help in quick prototyping, since Unity now has a nice UI tools. It is, you can build real layouts with typography and containers, and so you can quickly build panels that for building a clickable prototype, which you can move through nicely and smoothly, to which can be a good base for starting your game prototype. And you can, Unity has a nice support for 2Ds with grids and sprites, animations, all at a very basic level. And so even if you start with sprites, or sprites graphic, pixel graphics, sorry, or ISO graphics, or with hexagonal layouts, it's all supported, built in Unity, and that's really very nice. It can save you a lot of time and reach quickly a running prototype. So, but of course, here also assuming that doing this game design means that you are available for acquiring basic familiarity with algorithms like A*, search, patterns, and basic AI and things like this. And I think it's really hard to think that one could do game design without knowing anything about algorithms, and even simply writing algorithm in Excel, and vice versa. Unfortunately, I still see a lot of people around me that do the opposite thing. That is, they think that once one knows algorithms and programming, automatically one is easily can acquire game design skills, which is incredibly false. Game design requires a lot of research, studies, and attempts. So what can Unity help you? And only by working with a tool like this as a game designer, you can reach this so-called homeostasis test state. That is, you can have a little machine that maybe looks pretty and and gives you feedback, of course. So that's a specific thing of games. Not only, of course, but you can Unity can help you a lot in having a runnable version of your prototype, and in real time you can change values, so do the balancing of your game mechanics and model in place, and changing the variables in the editor while you're trying in testing and getting feedback. So this is really the heart of the game designer work, and this tool does it perfectly for you. Okay. So one little thing, one little first tool that I'm going to share with you, it's really trivial if you're a Unity expert, but still it helped us in some cases. It's just to have a sequence of panels that open and close with clicks. And this can help you in defining which are the panels that compose your scene. And so this is very nice that you can do it in the editor, and by using my script you can configure it and add and remove panels and how they fade one between the other. And so this is already a start with which you can become familiar. And you also start becoming familiar in separating logic and configuration, which is very, very important in games. We'll come back to this in a following slide. Another thing, of course, which is the heart of doing game design, is working with spreadsheets. That is, so again, separating content and code. In this case, separating content, code, and editor, and graphical and audio and animation assets in the editor. So we have three environments where we can work. We can keep them separate, but they work smoothly together, which is one is the code. One is which defines the model and the classes and the logical behavior. One is the editor, Unity's editors, with all the assets, the graphics, the sprites, the effects, the animations, and the audio. And the third one is spreadsheet, where you have all the texts, all the values that have to be loaded by your types, and so on. And by using my little script, you can have that Unity just each time you run it downloads from online the content of your spreadsheet and turns it into an asset. And so you, as a game designer, you can just go on a Google spreadsheet, change the values, run Unity, downloads the values, updates the models. And so that's really an amazing way to work. And you can, of course, with Google spreadsheets, you can share this kind of work with other people, and like you can also do internationalization in this way, and so on. Of course, in downloading, because it's a CSV format, you may have little problems with encoding, but my script has solved all those. So you find all this done for you. So that's I hope it's a nice thing to have. And then I also wrote in this other slide, you find another post with full instructions for using this. One of the core very simple tools I use as a game designer are finite numbers, which may seem completely crazy. But the fact that I define a class, a finite number, is either 0, 1, 2, 3. Or if you want to live in extreme luxury, you can use relative finite numbers, so from -3 to 0 to 3. Now, the fact that you're using your values in your game with finite numbers can be incredibly helpful in making a game that is easy to balance. And an expressive power of this 4 levels is already a lot, and this can replace continuity, which can easily get you into troubles even if just you think about the problems with floating numbers and their approximations. In fact, we always remember to, when using comparison in Unity and C# to use approximately, because if you're testing for the quality of floats, you know that you may get easily into troubles there. So this is another class I'm sharing, and which I hope can be useful. And there's a full math, of course, of finite numbers, because of course 1 plus 2 is 3, but 3 plus 1 is 3. And so it's a basic modulo, you may say, but if you're using explicitly written finite numbers, you're making your logic way more readable and clear. And then so that's one thing. And another thing which is linked to this, but it's not exactly the same, is the fact, very nice thing, that in C#, enums are actually integers, can be integers, and you can also explicitly tell an enum to be a number. So this, by exchanging integers and enum, can be very nice and very explicit. So let me see if I can show you something from the Unity project. Let me see. Come on. Its layout is, I try to share it so it's really tight. Let me see. Yeah, for example, my story, like my coach. No, my dealer. I think my dealer has here I'm showing you football drama, and this is my drug dealer class. And so the point I want to talk about is the fact that if an enum is a number, you can have a correspondence between finite number and enum values, which of course is a pure coding perspective changes nothing, but it actually changes a lot, because instead of looking at just numbers, you're seeing strings which talk, okay, which tell about their meaning, and this is very useful. You see here, so if I'm associating the enum values to integers, then I can, when I exchange them, like say when they come from the spreadsheet or they go into my dialog editor as a callback variable with value, this is using the enum instead of the numbers, makes your code way more readable. And so, for example, if you're using finite numbers and finite numbers math, you can switch from one state to the other by just increasing the finite number and then turning that into the enum value. And so that's very cool. And of course, if you expose the enums in the editor, in Unity editor, it shows you those as combos. So, or finite numbers even as combos. So that's again you're separating logic from configuration, and we'll get back to that with scriptable objects. Okay. Another nice little snippet I wanna show you is memory. So I have this class which is memory, and this came from considering the fact that when you have characters, but not only characters, any kind of event that AI or your game or the NPCs are generating in your game, you may need them to tell you stuff. And as we all know, it's not very nice that characters or AI or messages repeat themselves in a game, because you want to have, you're living this in this magic magic circle, but still you want some features of the human circle to be true. So if you want that a character somehow has a notion of, I've already said this, and what I've said more recently and more less recently, and with a sort of decay in time, this class can help you model that. And another more complex little class I'm sharing you is the character trait. This is actually motivated by John Ingold. He made a speech about the fact that when you're trying to model the state of a relationship between characters in games, one number, just having one number characterizing their relationship, may not may lead quickly to very bizarre behavior, in the sense that you should have a history of episodes instead of just having plus one minus one when they meet. If you have the history of episode, you can model that so positive episode, negative episodes, and so you can do like a comparison based on number of those. You will get a much better behavior. But I went beyond that. In fact, with my class, what you get is that there's a notion of episode and also a notion of decay in time of the memory of the episodes. So that will model for you relationship between characters way better, and you find it all done in the gist I'm sharing with the link in the slides. Okay, so this you've seen several examples, and these are all examples of concepts. Okay, typically concept the game designer has to come with while developing a game, that you can model with simple classes in Unity, and they're sort of transversal between games and projects, and you can benefit. And I've just shown you the way, a style of doing this, but of course there are many you can develop. Now, another problem in games that happens all the time, and for which I don't think there's a magical solution. It doesn't happen only in games; it happens in programming. But in games, it's even worse. Is to messing up your game project. In games, this is particularly true because there are so many dimensions involved into developing, and the fact that you have both long-term state, runtime state, the fact that you have media of different kinds, audio, animations, graphics, sprites, and even more if you have 3Ds. And so this can, if you don't find ways to separate maintenance, this can generate chaos very quickly. So so this is also why I'm telling you to use Unity and its header as much as possible, because you need to save mental energy, in particular if you're an indie gamer, if you have a small group and you have to do lots of things by yourself. And two plugins by Daniele Giardini, the My Giant, I really they're free, at least the basic version of Tween, and Dynamite is completely free. And if you use those two, this will increase both your editor quality and the fact that you can use tweening, which is very important. And it's a typical thing that as a game designer, you're not by default, you're not considering your game design if you're not a real practicing game designer, but instead will take a lot of time and energy, and also game design, specifically game design concepts and ideas to be solved in the right way. It's not something you can just delegate to the development phase. So one thing not to get into too much mess is very important, is to separate data and logic. And for this, Unity scriptable objects, which I think everybody who meets them for the first time really wonders what what the hell it can be used for, because they just look mono behavior that does less. But instead, scriptable objects have a lot of advantages, because you can inspect them with panels, but they are actually assets, so they're shared between scenes. And so they're really useful object. They're inspectable and changeable at runtime, but be careful there, because behavior in the editor at runtime and in your game build is completely different. Changes done in the editor at runtime are preserved on scriptable objects, and changes made on scriptable objects in your build game will not be. So be careful there. I wrote a full post on this, which is linked in the slides. But so if you're keeping data on scriptable object instead of keeping it on mono behaviors, that's a really good idea. Also, it makes it possible for non-developers to configure and inspect what's happening. I have a whole bunch of scriptable objects in my football drama project. For example, this scriptable object holds data for the story of football drama, and you see each step of the story has all sorts of configurations. And of course, this is an asset on a file system, and so this means that it's shared across scenes. There are no race conditions, which is another nightmare, which you as a game designer, and mostly as a game developer, you will have to deal with. And so you can see you're just extremely explicit about the data you have here. You can see it's strongly typed because you have combos, and you can have images previews. I'm using here both scriptable objects and the demylib extension to have all this luxury, and you can link to dialogues and so on and so on. And so this is this is UI configuration, cards configuration. All the configuration of data in the game is done on panels of scriptable objects, and this is just so much better than having data in your scenes or in your mono behavior. There's a beautiful video introducing scriptable objects, which I linked, which says much more and goes into much more depth about how they're used. But I just want to show you one thing: the usage of a scriptable object at runtime, not only as configuration but at runtime. So if I go into my football drama match scene here, I will just show you that. As soon as it loads, okay, let's see. It's downloading from the spreadsheet all the configuration data, and now it starts. Now, as soon as I start, I should have a runtime scriptable object here on the match, and here it is. And as you can see, this is a runtime scriptable object which you can inspect and change at runtime. So this is extremely important for your feedback loop and debug and so on. And so this is an example of yet another case where using scriptable objects is great, and using the editor also is great. Yeah, this is what I wanted to show you here. Yeah, and this is the post about being careful how to use them, which I referred to before. Another little trick you should use as a game designer and developer is the fact that you can not only use properties, of course, but you can use methods on scriptable objects. I use them by now all the time. So for example, if you're exposing a property which is the chance of goal, so chance of goal, you can have different values, of course, in production and development. And when you're changing those values, the problem is this: when you work in the editor and you change the values for testing, you're actually changing the asset value. So you're losing what you had, your nice production configuration, while you're changing the development, testing the one. So you can separate those and expose just a method and make the fields private and using serialized field, which is something by now I do always do on those exposed properties in the editor, so that your code will use actually the method to access them, and when the code is in production, it will use the production value. When it's development, it will use the development value. One little thing I want to show you is that my main game manager exposes all these values that I can change. Let me remove this. You can change at start, so that I have a single check that can change its production or not, so that everything that can refer to this and change its behavior without you losing track of what's happening. Yeah, you may have seen in my editor, I have all these decorated inspectors, and they're very useful. Another thing which I encourage you to do is to, when you let's make it big, is to not only do debugging in inspector, but actually doing in panels in game. So if you put your debug configuration in the in-game panels, you will get that you can test your do your test and debug also in the, let's say, if you publish your game on your mobile or on another device, which is very nice. So that's why I have my panels that I can open here or here, and I can have them so active also not only in the editor by changing the working inspector, but as panels. Of course, when I activate production, it all disappears, and so they're not available there. And so this is also a nice technique. Okay, yeah. And this is also linked to another point, which is very, very important. And I'll tell you also a little story about this. So to always make scenes self-sufficient. So that's very important, because of course it allows you to test the scenes in an easier way. Now consider how this is linked to, there's a strong linkage here between game design and game development, because to make a scene self-sufficient, you have to know which data and what makes sense when starting the scene, so that the scene will behave in a way that is identical to when data is actually coming from other scenes. And also here, consider how important to have your data in Scriptable objects, for example, so all the scene can access them. You don't have to duplicate them, and so making scenes self-sufficient is a game designer and developer task, and it's incredibly helpful. And like recently I had this idea. I said, because in football drama there's a whole story which is goes along the 18 football matches, but by now I think that the football match by themselves are quite interesting, that sufficiently interesting that you may want to play the match just by themselves. So thanks to the fact that I had made the scenes self-sufficient just for debugging purposes, it was very easy, and I'll show you how to make it that now you can start football drama, and I just had to add one button, so single game, and I obtained that one can play football drama just as a quick match, one match, instead of playing the full story like this. Okay, if I go into here, I can play a match, and it's very nice. And all this worked almost immediately, because I had the fact that the scenes are self-sufficient. So I actually had already done this for debug purposes. Okay, And another thing nice you can do when is changing time. I'll show it here and then I'll talk about it. So if I keep press F on my desktop, I'm actually speeding up the game. I'm speeding all the times here. This is also a good test whether your game is solid with respect to timing. You didn't hacked some event. Okay, and again here, this is a developer trick that can be incredibly useful for the game designer to develop the game, okay, and test the game. So little things, but again, it's a continuous talk between game development and game designer. Well, another thing I use Unity can help you is the fact that it has a notion of animator, that is it's a state machine. So and one thing I use here is to change state using one single variable, which is int valued. So if so this could by now could make you click, make you think about something that I said before, because it could be that if the transition between states is based on a value, integer value of a single variable, now yes, this single variable can be an enum. And so you have a meaningful state in changing state between states in order to make a uselessly complex sentence. And so that's another trick that links to everything before we said before, and it's very nice. Okay, so another thing, another point where the game design and development meet, and let's say they need each other. And they need each other considering time, because time in game is both crucial and comes in so many forms, like so gameplay time, players time, rhythm, even in the plot you need a rhythm, and game feel, progression, and how much your game lasts, and so on. So you have to be careful in handling time, and I suggest you to not to use just time.time, which is the players looking at the game time, but if you haven't changed the time scale, but instead use your own class to measure time. And because of course, for example, in games, of course, you have the pause button. So which will not, of course, stop time, the player's perceived time and the Unity's editor time, but it will you will have to somehow stop your game time. So if you know this from the beginning, it's very simple, but if you don't, and you develop tons of code depending on that may be a big problem. Now, also having control over time can allows you to do little tricks like speeding up the whole game, like I did before. Okay. Well, little things you can find in my example, little suggestion you can do is something that messes up a Unity quickly is the tagging system. So if you use it, or again, we want to use the editor as much as possible because of all the separation and practicality and the open environment this creates. So I mean, good coding is trying to build up not a closed environment, not an environment with secrets, which is an approach some developers have. No, the idea is to make an environment as open as possible. And again, so if you formalize some things, it will make it easier to keep the environment clean and simple. And so some basic tricks, I really wonder why some developers don't use it. Like the first thing I do when I configure Unity and the code writing is the fact that each time I lose focus on my code, it gets saved. I'm not in risk of losing stuff which I had written before if I'm using a versioning system, and also a local versioning system. Of course, you should use both. So that's one of the first thing I would configure. And Unity had a very bizarre feature, which is partially still there, unfortunately, is the fact that it tries to reload classes when they're changed, and of course it always fails. I mean, even if those for you who've been in web development know this with containers, web containers try to do the same thing and fail, of course. And so instead of just stopping and restarting as it should. Anyway, we hope that this gets fixed. It's almost fixed, but not fixed completely yet. Well, I've said this before, but let's talk about this again. In sense, how much game design and game development should talk with each other. And well, for example, I have in Football Drama this one card feedback. Now. Should this be, how should this be built, this one card feedback? Should it be hard coded in a scene or not? Well, it depends, of course, where the game designer thinks it's possible that it will be used. So it's important not to think in terms where it's used now, but in terms of where it's possible that it will be used. What's this possibility space of this usage of this feature, because you want to build for change. Of course, this is all people who are expert in coding know that this is really important. And building for change, so if you're not 100% aware of the game design behind things, you will not know what things will likely change, will change a lot, what things may change less. And so how much effort in like isolating, making this card one feature animations and effects a real prefab, or it could be hard coded into a scene. Well, tendentially make everything as much a prefab, which is actually impossible in Unity today because it doesn't have the notion of nested prefab, but it's coming soon, looks really nice. So keep an eye on that because it could solve a lot of problems. About this fact that what I mean, classically code, when like the basic attitude to code has been that code should be non-duplicated as much as possible, as short as possible. And of course, unfortunately, this has been revised, and the focus is instead not only readability, but in fact how easy it is to change it. Sometimes duplicated code can be easier to change than non-duplicated code, which has lots of dependencies and intricacies. So I really advise you to read this beautiful book, which is not linked to Ruby at all as a programming language, Practical Object-Oriented Design in Ruby by Sandy Metz. It's a really beautiful book. And also to watch the video about a clean code I will refer to in a little while. Oh, yes, this is another thing which if you look at it both as a game designer and as a game developer, you will this may be really helpful. The fact that when you think of a property on an object, and in games like let's say they done a certain thing, they agreed to this shady deal. So this may be a boolean at the start that they agreed or they didn't agree. But then, of course, in nicer games, things are not just black and white, just like in life. So they agreed with reservation, they agreed with enthusiasm, they agreed that actually they didn't. And so this boolean soon becomes an enum. And actually, once it's become an enum, then it may evolve more and become each of these values. It may be nice to have a full behavior, maybe a configure behavior. That is, so it becomes a line like my story steps. So my story steps, they began just like that. They were just a string. Then they became an enum. Let me see. And it's still probably too rough. And then they became each of these lines, each story step has a full configuration. You may download part of this configuration from the Excel sheet online, and then you will develop methods that each time you change state will have some feedback. So just consider this pattern and be ready to do these changes. This can lead to really nice code, even if the complexity is increasing. And something else, the problem as a modeling game designer with code, you may find you may struggle with at times, is the distinction between type and instances. So like, because in games it's natural to have that an object has a set of properties which are defined by game design. So because they're like an enemy has this kind of features, and then another set of properties that change during runtime. So be clear about what is defined on the type and what is defined on an instance of the type, and so distinguishing between configuration values and runtime values. But actually there's more. There's configuration values that will be saved in game, so it can be saved across one gameplay and the next one, and values that are completely local to the scene or the gameplay state. So, and of course you can have lots of narrower scopes, like I have in my football matches. So this is typical of games. Of course this happens also in enterprise software, but not as much, and not in so many levels of definitions. Okay, another little thing. So if you're using Unity, you should embrace Unity. And for me, it was really hard at the beginning because I came from developing like enterprise software, so classes from scratch, from below my models. Instead of extending model behavior, as you do a lot of time here, I mean, even a scriptable object, extend a Unity object. And model behavior has loads of methods, so you really should change your way of thinking classes when you're using model behavior. Of course, you can have parallel hierarchies for your models, which is okay, but don't go against the framework. This is something I see people trying, and they of course spend so much energy going against the framework that the code quality actually, they think when they start are going to increase it, but actually decreases. And so be careful about that. And yeah, for example, one observation this guy does in this beautiful talk on scriptable objects, which I referred to before, is that think about Unity as the inversion of control. And you pivot on that. And so the inversion of control is Unity itself, is the editor itself. And if you're using lots of scriptable objects, this becomes more and more clear, and it works wonderfully. And of course, keeping an open environment. This is when I was referring to writing code which is focused on maintainability and not in being as short as possible or being as agile as possible. So going beyond these ideas, this beautiful talk about livable code is something I suggest you to watch. Yeah, well, is there anybody else who believes in this strict link between coding and game design and using Unity for this? Yes, there is. And it's this beautiful book, Introduction to Game Design, Prototyping, Development, which has been released in the second edition recently, and I found that I'm actually into the praise of the book. So of course I'm praising again the book just to give importance to myself. And so this is something I really suggest you to read. Also, there's a really nice part on the game balancing and statistics, which is an important part of our work. And once done together with Unity and spreadsheets, you can do really good work there. I thank Daniele Giardini for checking the slides and Petar before my talk. And so if you want to see all this put into work, you can follow my Twitter feed, and I'm developing all this. I mean, I developed as a service and as applied games many projects, but this all coming together into my football drama narrative managerial game, which is you can add to your Steam wishlist, and you can join us on Discord. We will be at the Milan Games Week And of course, on the Discord link, there's also a mailing list for beta testers, which I hope you will join. And of course, I'm also available as game designer and copywriter, team leader, developer, teacher, and consultant. You just have to write me and we can talk. I hope so. This is all, and I wish you a nice day. Bye.